Wait,
You're the opener.
MK, do we need to wait?
No.
Okay, I think we're gonna go live
People
now.
are, the anticipation is killing them.
People are dying. Guys, we are actually live. Yeah, if you want to talk about... Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, and welcome everyone to another episode of Live with ASI, a month of knowledge production. My name is Bassam Haddad.
And I'm MK Smith. It's great as always to be here. We've got a great show lined up and a lot to get to for the month of March.
We'll be offering you the usual recommendations from Newton, and as well as our must-read selections. And we have interviews covering issues ranging from the 20th anniversary of the U.S. invasion of Iraq and its many impacts, including the Iraq project that we have embarked on, all the way to the fallout of the earthquake in Turkey.
We will also be discussing the legacy of the Egyptian uprising 12 years ago, as well as the scale of the only peer-reviewed academic journal of Kurdish studies. Let's get to it. First, we will go over what's new in our New Texts Out Now series, or Newtons. There's a fascinating conversation with Nadia Sabeti, Laura Deeb, and Solin Nelbetian about their new volume, Practicing Sectarianism, Archival and Ethnographic Interventions on Lebanon, which was born out of a panel that the three participated in 2018. It serves as a crucial intercession into the typical conversations on Lebanese sectarianism. And staying with Lebanon, Jeffrey Karam. I don't know why my brain didn't process it. And Rima Majd spoke with Jadalia about a new book they co-edited called The Lebanon Uprising of 2019, Voices from the Revolution, which provides a record of the events of that time and the complexity of the individual experiences of those who took to the streets.
Also over at Newton, there is a discussion with Jessica Barnes about her new book, Staple Security, Bread and Wheat in Egypt, which addresses the role that those staple foods play in Egyptian society and anxieties around the possibility of a shortage. Lastly, we recommend Michael Francis Laffan's Under Empire, Muslim Lives and Loyalties Across the Indian Ocean World, 1775 to 1945, which is an examination of the development of the notion of the Muslim world, of a Muslim world, as well as migrations and connections between South Africa, Southern Arabia, and Southeast Asia over the course of that time. Definitely check all of those new books out.
Now, I'd like to welcome our first guests who are live in the studio today, which is very exciting. Omar Siri is an affiliated scholar at SOAS University in the UK, and Sinan Antoun is a poet, novelist, and translator, and among many other things, a co-founder of Jadalia. They spoke yesterday at a panel in Washington, D.C., marking the 20th anniversary of the U.S. invasion of Iraq, and are here to discuss with us now. After a quick break, they will be with us here in the studio.
It's great to have you both. I know it's a little crammed, so please feel free to enjoy the... well, MK is enjoying how close everybody is. Very happy to have you both with us again. Sinan, perhaps we can start with you. Given that we were on the same panel yesterday, the three of us, I was moderating. It was yourself, Professor Sassoon, Professor Rochelle Davis, and Professor Pete Moore, and then, well, I was going to say your name, Omar Sirri. It was a panel on the invasion of Iraq and after, and it was pretty tight, and we had a really good discussion. So let's start with you, if you can tell us your view on what transpired and what that moment meant to you, especially as someone who lived in Iraq for probably half your life.
I was honored to be part of that conference and of especially the first panel, in which the panelists, scholars just covered different aspects of the impact of the 20 years since the American invasion of Iraq in various areas, including how it affected the region and authoritarianism, or for me, just an overview of the problematics of how the war is viewed in the U.S. still until today, and so many other things that we cannot cover in a few minutes, but that's it.
Okay, we will come back to you. I want to ask you a couple more questions. Omar, can you share with us your thoughts and tell us a little bit about what you shared with us during your actual presentation?
Sure, yeah, thanks for the invitation to be here and to join at the conference. It was an honor to kind of to join everyone there yesterday. Part of my interventions that I was part of the interventions I was trying to make, Bassam, were around how we think about Baghdad specifically as an area of focus for my research. And namely how we write about post-invasion, post-occupation Iraq, 20 years on, through the everyday, the lens of the everyday, the lens of the mundane, how the effects of the invasion and occupation live on through the everyday lives of the citizens of the city, and I tried to capture that through infrastructure, essentially. Part of how I sought to capture that was through a discussion of infrastructure and speed bumps in particular, and the ways in which the invasion and occupation and what was built and unbuilt or de-developed, if you will, from the angle of the state as such, was essentially a privatization of everyday life, where the basic public provisions normally associated with and tied to the state and to government were left in the hands of citizens, of private citizens to take care of, namely the provision of security, and that's some of what I spoke of and about yesterday during the panel.
Sinan, can you please tell us a bit more about your own experience as somebody who lived through the first Iraq war, the international coalition that ousted Iraq from Kuwait, and then, of course, when we went back to Iraq, we did show our film about Baghdad that you and I and Adam Shapiro, Maya Mekdashi, and Suzy Salami filmed in 2003. Where we went back to Baghdad and visited the places and spaces that you dwelled in, which we also screened yesterday with really good showing and a lot of interesting conversation. Can you tell us something a bit more personal? I mean, we went through everything yesterday. I opened the conference and I addressed the monstrosity of the fraudulent invasion, and everyone addressed a number of political, economic, and social ramifications, including the human misery that took place henceforth. Can you tell us a little bit how you felt as not as an analyst, but as an Iraqi, as a poet maybe, throughout this period of commemorating 20 years of this devastation, and maybe even 50, 30, 40 years actually.
Well, I mean, in my one of the 3 points that I tried to make in my intervention yesterday was about how it's very important to go back to 1991. If one were to understand in a more complicated way the destruction of Iraq, I see 2003 as Act 3 in the destruction of Iraq and Iraqi society. And Act One in that narrative is the 1991 Gulf War. That's very important. And of course, Act Two would be the genocidal sanctions that followed. But are you asking me about how I felt yesterday, or how we felt when we went back and made the documentary?
Basically, you and I spoke and about how this is a moment where we are taking it all in, and people like myself who didn't live in Iraq, I visited, we made the film, but someone like you who had lived through the 80s, the miserable 80s, of course, with the war with Iran, and then the first Gulf War, the sanctions that we experienced, you experienced from afar, and then we went back to address the war. Okay. I mean, maybe
well, I should say something
not analytical, I guess.
No. When I left Iraq in 1991 and I would meet Iraqis from the diaspora or Arabs, and they would all say it was so debilitating and painful to watch Baghdad being bombed. And at the time, being much younger, and I was a bit dismissive of that because I thought that, we living there and experiencing the bombing. Later, in 2003, watching Baghdad, my hometown, being bombed on TV, I understood belatedly there's a certain type of melancholy and paralysis when you watch your hometown being bombed. But yesterday and these last few weeks, it's a bitter experience for those of us who are old enough to remember 2002 and how the run-up to the war was staged and disseminated. And that's why we made this documentary. It's just very painful to see what has happened to this country and to navigate the complicated feelings, especially for those of us, many of us Iraqis who are against the dictatorship, but were also against the invasion and the occupation. And I have to repeat it here because it has been erased in a way from public memory that before the invasion, there was a petition that was signed by hundreds of Iraqis in the diaspora, many of whom opponents of and victims of the Saddam Hussein regime, which basically said no to dictatorship and no to war, and spelled out what disastrous effects the invasion would have on Iraq. So it's very painful for all of us who knew that there would be no weapons of mass destruction, that a military occupation would really even further destroy Iraqi society. And there isn't much to say more than that.
Thank you. Omar, you were in Baghdad until very recently, and you have been doing field research on very interesting topics. We experienced the 20-year anniversary from afar in a particular way. How did you find people in Iraq experiencing a 20-year anniversary, or is it not that? Does it not occupy like a particular meaning on that date in specifically?
Yeah, I think so. I was there for the last month or so, carrying out additional research for a book project, and I think on some level there's been so many of these quote unquote anniversaries, and that day and that week is on some level like any other. To me, what was most striking, as someone who's been working on Baghdad specifically, the city has changed. My focus has been checkpoints, and the ways in which checkpoints kind of were ubiquitous, dotted, pockmarked, if you will, the urban landscape for the better part of 2 decades. And over the last few years, slowly different governments have been slowly removing the different kinds of material barriers to urban mobility, checkpoints, concrete walls, fences, barbed wire, and in this kind of last visit, a number of the kind of main thoroughfare checkpoints, if you will, that had remained were also removed towards the end of last year, as a new government had taken office. And this is on some level not surprising. A number of, as I mentioned, subsequent governments have used kind of the removal of security architecture to show kinds of progress, specifically in the capital, which represents kind of the seat of power, right? So to me, the changes, the urban transformations of the city, and this date and this week, this year, are at once kind of remarkable, and yet also quite telling of the state of of the city and the country that it's taken this long to see that kind of removal of security architecture and infrastructure. And I think it's important to note that these kinds of changes have really also been pushed and come about because of popular protest. What was striking to me was, as I left about a week ago, I left Baghdad. And, we were 2 or 3 days into Ramadan, and people took to the streets again, after in the evenings and at nighttime, to protest the passing of an election law that returns Iraq back to this Saint-Ligo system that people were lamenting for years, and that the parliament was forced to change after the protests. And now that now they've returned back to that system. And so once they were about to pass it, people took back to the streets. The point here is that the major changes that have happened, in a positive way, have come about because of popular protest, in largely from 2019, 2020, but of course protests before that. So to me, when we think about these anniversaries and these moments that mark that invasion, the big, more positive and I think hopeful changes have come about because of popular protest.
Thanks, Omar. Sinan, can you leave us with basically any sort of outlook, if there is an outlook, for what might we expect going forward in Iraq? I know this is a tough question, but so many of us basically are way more clueless than somebody who's plugged in.
I'm not as plugged in as Omar, but I should say we've been discussing this, but let's go back to 2010 and think no one ever really expected that there would be uprisings in the region. But also for Iraq, no one ever really expected there would be this massive uprising in 2019. In Iraq, it's very complicated, it's very difficult, but Iraq is a very young country, and the structural problems that caused the 2019 uprising are still there. And I, like many, believe in the resourcefulness and the courage and the desire of hundreds of thousands of young Iraqi men and women who cannot leave the country, and they want to have a dignified life that they deserve, and they will try. So we don't know, but things will not remain the way they are. They can't.
Thank you. Thank you both. We'd like to say a lot more and ask a lot more, but we are going to be satisfied with this much, and we will be hosting a few more podcasts. And Omar, you will also be invited to address the research you're doing in Iraq as well, and perhaps Sinan and I will interview you. Thank you both for coming. We will do a short break, and then we will continue with our broadcast with Hussam Hamalawi addressing the happy case of Egypt. I wanted to just say a couple words about the project on Iraq. We actually have, Sinan, we actually went back to broadcasting. Yeah. I just want, shukran. We just wanted to share that there is something called the Iraq 2023 project that the Arab Studies Institute, the Center for Contemporary Arab Studies at Georgetown University, and the Middle East and Islamic Studies program at George Mason are going to carry out, for the most part, under the rubric of the Arab Studies Institute's pedagogy initiative, the Middle East Studies Pedagogy Initiative, where there will be a portal that will include resources for educators, researchers, students, journalists, and activists, anyone who wishes to learn more about Iraq. And it will be, it's not live now, but it will be under the title, theinvasionofiraq.com. I know it's very easy. So write it down, check it out after the middle of April. It's going to be called theinvasionofiraq.com. So please come back to that URL. We will also be finishing a few other podcasts in the meantime, and I think we will talk about this project again soon as well.
So soon that we're going to talk about it right now, actually. We're going to talk about continued
don't mess around.
podcasts. So Bassam recorded a number of interesting conversations for the Flow podcast last month. Among those was an interview with Kali Rubai about the environmental impact of imperialist wars in Iraq. Kali is an assistant professor in the Department of Anthropology at the University of Purdue. Unfortunately, she is unable to join us today. Hopefully, in the future, we will have her on. However, just plugging the podcast and the fact that it is available to watch on YouTube, you can find the link on Jadalia either by typing in Flow Podcast or waiting for this episode's digest, which will be available in the coming days. And now we will move on from the topic of Iraq. Bassam recorded another interview with Flow earlier in the month with Hossam Hamalawi, thank you, regarding the early days of the Egyptian revolution. Hossam is an Egyptian journalist and activist who is currently pursuing his PhD in Berlin.
Hossam, we are going to bring you in right now. Kifak,
أهلا بسام.
how are you?
Not so bad. It's always
It's
good to be
great.
on your show.
Always good to see you, Habibi. We had a really fantastic conversation, and I don't say this because I was in it or you were in it. I say this because there were so many comments, as you may have seen on Twitter, that really appreciated your intervention on what has transpired in Egypt since 2011, as well as those very, very tense and critical moments in January, February, March, and April of 2011. Can you tell us a little bit about that podcast in general, basically what we addressed with some focus on the question of security and intelligence apparatus in Egypt then and now?
When we spoke last time, and actually throughout the revolution years ago, it was you and I addressed a couple of topics. One was the labor movement, and the second one was the security apparatus in Egypt, which we can safely say was the trigger for the revolution in the first place. After all, police brutality in Egypt has been the instigator of the uprising, and arguably also Tunisia, for sure. In Egypt, security apparatus has long been fragmented because since its foundation was always geared towards coup-proofing. This meant that we had a fragmented security sector among the police, the military, and the General Intelligence Service, which is al-Mukhabarat al-Amma, as most people would know it by. The rivalry and the competition between them across the decades before 2011 stemmed from the rulers' intention or desire to protect themselves from any takeover of power from the elites, to be more specific, the military, which was a legitimate concern, of course. Our region and the global south has been plagued with military coups. But another important reason for this is that our rulers, Bassam, never took us seriously. They have always regarded the street protest at best to create some riots. But this changed after 2011, and hence we are now faced with a new, completely different authoritarian formula.
Thank you, Hassam. And I have shared with you during the podcast and before, actually, that we would like to speak with you again and dissect more closely the role of the military then and now. Is there anything that you have seen in terms of the institutional influence or the institutional makeup or the institutional relations of the military, whether with the business sector, with the security sector, with the presidency, with the Egyptian political system and its various parts, including other institutions like parliament, the judiciary? Where is the military today? And we will leave you with this because we promised you just a few minutes. Where is the military today in Egypt compared to the eve of the Mubarak era?
Some would like to describe the military as having been marginalized under Mubarak, which, in my view, is not correct. But the military was part of the ruling coalition under Mubarak's regime. What changed today is that the military has become the ruling class in Egypt. Our ruling elites at the moment, the military generals constitute its core, and they are flanked or surrounded by a bunch of police and GIS generals. And it is like the repressive apparatus, basically, of the Egyptian state has taken over the state itself. This is taking a form of literally colonization of the different state organs in Egypt, where military generals who have always enjoyed presence in the different departments of the state, but never on the level as we are today. And contrary to some what might think, the military are not agents of our capitalist class. They themselves have become the capitalist now. We have a militarized form of capitalism in Egypt, which is fundamentally different even from what we have seen under Nasser, for example. And such a regime is not even friendly towards this business class. And they try to appropriate their wealth other than coordinating with them. So, unfortunately, the counter revolution has evolved into a completely different authoritarian formula, which will be very difficult to confront in the next revolution when it happens.
Thank you very much, Hussam. I really look forward to learning more and talking more about Egypt with you. Mabruk on your stellar dissertation. I know myself at least 3 dozen people who are dying to get their hands on it. So I hope that we get to see it soon and have it be turned into a volume, which I think will be right up there with some of the classics about Egyptian politics. Shukran, Hussam, and
Thank
we
you.
hope to see you soon. Take care. All right.
Shifting.
Wow. Whoa, whoa,
That's
whoa,
one
whoa,
too many of
whoa.
me.
Yeah, we have too
Thank
many.
you.
Yeah, there
Okay.
you go.
Shifting over to the Jadalia Turkey page, contributors Onur Onslan and Ebru Kayelp wrote a piece earlier this month about earthquake preparedness in the country and its historical and political dynamics. Onur is a PhD candidate at UC Davis and is here with us now. Welcome.
Hello, Noor.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Hello.
I want to start off by asking you what inspired you and Ibru to write this piece in the aftermath of the recent devastation. Besides, of course, the devastation itself, first of all, as you may have seen on Jadalia, I mean, everybody was devastated. We still are, even if the story does not unfold on the media anymore, of course. And I'd like to hear your thoughts on this, how certain things kind of disappear as if they never happened because of the news cycle. But if you can tell us a little bit about writing this piece and what you addressed.
So, I mean, after the earthquake, like in the first moments, like as all Turkish people, we were paralyzed and we were just looking at Twitter and social media because like people were still asking help from like under the rubble. Like they were saying like we are stuck and please like come and help us. So and like the and also we were seeing this like the numbers of losses, or they were like overlapping and like increasing day by day. And of course at the same time people were discussing what caused this disaster. So there were like state discourse that the earthquake was so big and there was nothing to do about it. Any government in the world like would not respond this like such a disaster in this scale. And and the other like the side was also discussing about like the lack of preparation, or like the lack of governmental response to this earthquake. So so we wanted to write this piece because just we wanted to draw attention to this like general network, or like this giant industry that was created after the 1999 earthquakes, which claimed again like thousands of lives. So after 1999, like we enacted new laws, and we also like there are so many construction companies like to try to, constructed new buildings that were supposed to resilience against the earthquakes. But so we wanted to say that like this preparation network, that preparation logic also has failed. And like this earthquake, actually this like 2023 earthquakes were just showing this failure.
Thank you so much. Now, you and Ibru wrote about the failures of the post 1999 policies, and I'm curious if you see any potential for change in approach by the government now. Do you think that this was a wake up call for them with regards to policies in place pertaining to earthquake preparedness?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and I think they are just following the new mentality, new logic, like the same logic. So it's not new, because uh, so they are like discussing, for example, now like new construction plans, and they are like trying to remove the cities to the like this so-called stronger ground, and they are again constructing like many buildings in these lands. And like so in the post 1999 order, the goal was to build these buildings, and they were trying to make individuals pay for these new buildings, right? So it was like, when if your building was weaker, you just need to go to this building contractors and like have some kind of agreement with them, and then you need to like demolish your house and reconstruct it. But during this process, you were becoming indebted, and you were like you had to spend so much money to get this like stronger houses against the earthquake. But this mentality, this logic has not changed, because we are seeing that the government also asks money from people who has lost everything in this earthquake to get these like new houses. So so in that sense, uh like individuals are like still responsible to prepare themselves against the future earthquakes. So here we see that like the state is still trying to be like a facilitator to make the people prepared against these earthquakes. So in that sense, yeah, so few things have changed, and we are just hoping that like in the election maybe new government will approach this problem, earthquake preparedness, differently.
Thank you, Onur. And would you join us again in the future? Because we would love to do a follow up on what is going on in Turkey. And we would love for people who have contributed to Jadaliya to join us maybe in a round table with the Turkey page editors to address those sorts of things after they are out of the media cycle, because something happens in the media cycle that is, I think, or we think, is pretty ugly. But we would like to go back and address that. Things such as the protests in Iran now are completely out of the media cycle. The ramifications of the earthquake are completely out of the media cycle. The 20th anniversary of the invasion of Iraq is completely out. And I'm not saying that everything needs to be there all the time, but there is a sense that this is just news. It's not real. It's abstract. So we would love to connect with you again.
Thank you. Yeah,
Thank
me
you
too.
so much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Anwar.
for your
We'd now like to welcome Nilay Ozak Gundogan, an associate professor of Ottoman and Middle East history, to discuss a piece she wrote for Jadaliyya regarding the sale of the only peer-reviewed academic journal of Kurdish studies to a predatory publisher. Nilay is joining us now. Welcome.
Hello,
And
hello. Thanks
I-
for having me.
Thanks,
course.
Nilay.
Thank you
And
for
I must
joining
say
us.
that when I saw your last name, it traumatized me a little bit because Gundogan scored against Liverpool this morning, and it was hard for me and for so many of us. As you can see, is there
I know,
Muhammad
I-
Salah behind you? Yeah.
I don't follow soccer, but students keep asking me if you're related, but we are not because it's a common last name.
He's a remarkable player. Just so you know, it's a big deal. He's a big deal.
Okay. Well,
Unfortunately
that's
for
all
us in Liverpool.
wow. Okay. It's just like my students find a way to connect with me through the last name, so it works out.
Great. Well, thank you for joining us today to talk about this important piece. I'm curious if you can give our audience a little bit of context about the importance of this academic journal that covers Kurdish studies.
For sure. Kurdish Studies Journal was established about 10 years ago. It's Europe-based by Velat Zeydanlıoğlu, who is a scholar in England. And it has been the only peer-reviewed academic journal in the Euro-American academia. And in the piece, I mentioned this too, like Kurdish studies is kind of on the margins of larger Middle Eastern area studies. And we don't have that many peer-reviewed publications. The representation of works in the university presses, like monographs, is quite limited. And so the field is evolving, but we still need a lot of support from like the publishers, our colleagues in other fields. So like in the past decade or so, Kurdish Studies Journal was doing quite well, peer-reviewed, important scholars as in the editorial board, and published important pieces that contributed greatly to the Kurdish studies field. But a couple of months ago, the editorial board, they issued like a public statement talking about what happened to the journal. Basically, the current owner, if you will, the company who owns the journal, sold it to a commercial, which we describe as a predatory journal, a predatory press, which publishes articles basically in return for fees. And that's like what I was talking about in the piece, because it's not just like one journal, any journal. It is the only journal, only peer-reviewed journal in the Kurdish studies field.
And can you tell us a little bit about the implications of this case in the future and the future of Kurdish studies?
Mm-hmm. I mean, it has broader implications beyond Kurdish studies. What is happening to academic publishing, and what do all these predatory companies do to academic publishing? That's like a part of a broader conversation that concerns everybody else in our profession. But as far as the Kurdish studies is concerned, this is not arbitrary. It's not just we have only one journal, right? And now the scholars on the editorial board, they're trying to find another publisher who will publish this journal. But as far as the implications are concerned, it refers to, like, the title of my piece is like the homeless journal of an orphan field. The implications is that the Kurdish studies publications, they can't find a home quite easily because of the marginalization of the Kurdish studies in the larger Middle Eastern studies in Europe and in North America. So that this means that universities, Middle Eastern studies centers, our colleagues in other fields, they can support us. They can support scholars in the Kurdish studies and the Kurdish studies field at large, so that we can find homes for our publications easily. So it won't be we won't face another case like this where our only journal is being sold for commercial purposes.
Thank you very much, Nilay. By the way, are we messing up your the pronunciation of your first name? Is it Nilay or Nilay?
Nilay. Thanks for
Nilay.
asking. It is Nilay.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I mean because because it's an yeah. Thank you very much. And again, we hope to also see you again on the pages of Jadaliya and on our shows. What you are doing is extremely important, and we are very much aware of the issues you're addressing and the importance of the issues you're addressing with respect to these topics, and would love to host you again.
Thank you very much. I'm really grateful. I have published a couple of pieces on Jadaliya. I'm grateful for their support, for helping us our voices heard. Thank you.
Thank you, and
Thank you.
hopefully in under better circumstances when Gundogan does not score against us, Liverpool.
Yes, I would support that. Thank you.
You were supportive because you don't care.
Absolutely. I just want to make you happy. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Salam.
you.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Now we will switch over to talking about what's going on at the Status Audio magazine. Pressing Matter is a series at Status which consists of conversations between co-hosts Malihe Razazan and Adil Iskandar, in which they discuss urgent issues in the media world. Adil is an assistant professor of global communication as well as a co-editor of Jadaliya. It is great to have you here, my friend. We haven't seen you in a couple months.
Adil,
Hi, okay. Hi, Bassam.
I chose the font or the background of the font to be the same color as your t-shirt, as well as the white font on it.
That's great. Thank you.
It's like, that's so generous of you. Thank you.
You and Malih have released 3 episodes over the last 2 months, and I know that you've recorded them at different times. It's been difficult the past year and a half at all levels, but you are releasing them, and we are so excited. I don't know of any 2 people I'd love to hear from about these issues more than loving to hear about these issues from you guys. Can you tell us a little bit about them and what we might expect going forward? And based on your really profound engagement with things media, if there is something today, every time you and I talk, you say something insightful. I'm putting a little bit of pressure on you about where the media is today, right? I mean, the news cycle, the method is the what's the thing? What's that thing? The medium is the
Message.
the medium
Or
is
the
the
message.
حاجات زي كده يعني. So if you could actually, you say them so well and then they stick. So if you can also tell us where actually is media reporting today, especially with the rise of artificial intelligence.
So, first of all, thank you so much, Bassam and MK, for having me on again. You're right. The Pressing Matter is a show that we've been working on. It's been kind of slowly germinating and piloting behind the scenes, and we've sort of been sitting on it, kind of waiting for a launch. And so some of the topics that we addressed may appear dated, but they're not really dated because nothing really seems to go away. So the 3 episodes of the show that we launched or are now online deal with various things. The first one is the idea of world press freedom and what that means and how problematic it is in some regards, because countries are defined as free and unfree according to complicated metrics. And as much as you claim to enjoy listening to Malih and I talk, I think many of us got used to Malih's kind of sobering voice in helping us understand and unpack the region on Voices of the Middle East and North Africa, Vomina, the show. So this is an opportunity to kind of listen to her kind of reflect and have us in conversation. Another episode deals with how algorithms and lists are designed to push us. And this kind of, in a way, speaks to your question about where we're going. Nowadays, very few media entities are curating content because they're driven by the public good, or because they're serving a public interest of some sort. Quite the contrary. Instead, hello, Oyster. Someone wants to say hello, you guys. What instead is happening is that there are algorithms that are tailoring content and customizing it in such a way so that it feeds our own sort of internal desires to enjoy the content that we want. And so we are served what we think we want, but in reality, we're also being kind of mined for not only for our data but for our inclinations. And so we rarely encounter new stuff. We rarely encounter compelling new things unless they are tied to consumerist purchasing practices. So that's the episode that we deal with. We call it the best top 10 list ever, and really it's kind of a joke and a parody of how we are encountering so many lists in the things that we're looking up online. And the third one is also an interesting piece that deals with Al Jazeera, which we've been talking about since 1996. So it feels like Al Jazeera is kind of a dated topic, but it really isn't, because Al Jazeera is constantly inventing and reinventing itself as the political topography and landscape of the region and the world keeps shifting. And really, we zoom in on this one project where Al Jazeera launches a sort of a right wing or conservative news show or commentary show and discussion show geared for the U.S. audience to kind of tap into that sort of Trump, that rise in Trump's popularity. But like Trump's kind of dynamics, as well as the conservative movement in the U.S., but also what's happening within Al Jazeera, that show only lasts about 10 months and becomes defunct and very quietly shuts down. But this is an opportunity for us to explore what Al Jazeera's motives are to reach new audiences. And so those are the 3 episodes that we have on hand. We have 2 episodes that are forthcoming in the next while. One of them deals with the women life freedom movement in Iran and how it's being articulated or challenged in the media. Both the sort of Iran, the Islamic Republic's kind of regime media, but also the lay of the land as far as regional programming and the Western kind of fetishization of the movement, as well as California-based Iranian diaspora movements and their investment in media entities. So that's going to happen, and we're also going to zoom in a little bit more closely on the 20th anniversary of the U.S.-led war in Iraq, and thinking about how the media was co-opted and Iraqi voices were erased to lead up to that war, that invasion, and ensuing civil war, et cetera, et cetera. And we can revisit that more so. But all this to say that there's never a shortage of things to discuss. I will say, in answering your question about what's happening in the media, I think it's fair to say that now we can't really talk about the media in the singular. Media is now a plural. There's so many echo chambers, clusters, environments, landscapes, and sometimes they intersect, sometimes they compete. But what we are definitely witnessing is a move away from professionalization to digitization. And that digitization also means that we are slowly losing our agency. Even though we feel like we are involved in curating the content that we have, we can choose our playlists, we can organize our kind of news feeds, but really a lot of this curation happens before it even reaches us, and so we're losing a lot more agency, and we're becoming more information poor rather than information rich. And I think that is the name of the game in this coming period.
For a second, Adil, when you said we're moving away from professionalization to digitization, I was hoping that you meant that we're moving away from professionalization to how MK and I run the show.
Yeah.
More laid back.
Then it turns out it's much
Well,
worse than that.
It is digital. I mean, the thing, it's funny.
I meant like informalization.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I'll tell you one thing that I really, really sort of like.
By the way,
to
you
say,
can tell me a lot because Mu'in is late or he's not coming.
Okay.
Send you a message.
We'll talk about it another time.
No,
but
tell me a lot. I said say
amateur is
more.
always best.
Say more. He's not coming. Go ahead.
Oh, he's not coming.
Yeah.
Okay, خلاص بقى احنا خلينا قاعدين. One of the and the cat's coming to join, command the call.
أهلا وسهلا.
يخليك. No, I
Is
think
this what you meant by where the media is going? What's happening right
See,
now? You and I
this is the
laughing,
future
and
of
then the
media.
cat is behind you. Is this digitization? هو ده
This is a digital cat. It's not a real cat. No, it's no. I think one of the things that that really intrigues me, especially about the work of Edward Said, and it doesn't relate to media more particularly, but Edward Said often talked about the importance of thinking about things through an amateur lens, and the amateur lens doesn't mean simplification or not knowing what you're doing, but rather once you reach a point where you are kind of a virtuoso, you understand your subject matter, you're in a position to experiment and to do things differently the way an amateur would be. So professionalization isn't necessarily what we want. We've seen what professionalization in media and journalism has done. It's given us like the CNNs, the Fox Newses, this kind of mainstreaming, mass production of content that is so incredibly repetitive and so devoid of creativity. But also, in addition to that, it doesn't push the envelope. Professionalization means standardization, and standardization leaves us really kind of devoid of context. So to create context is to push boundaries, to explore new terrain, to explore those like the contours that aren't exactly flat or comfortable, to operate outside of format. And I think in a way, live with ASI and everything we do in Jadaliya and ASI's work it's against the grain, not just because because the content itself is considered fringe or outside the main frame, but it's also generative and interesting and compelling, and in some ways radical because it challenges the format. Like it does things differently. This is all very different than what we see elsewhere. So kudos to
That's
you guys
that's
for
awesome.
continuing to
Anjad,
walk
that's
along.
awesome. And we just brought in Mu'in before he got ready
See?
on purpose.
He stole my time. Thanks, Moin.
How are you? No, I wanted you to overlap, as you could tell from the chat that we're having. Mu'in, Adil is comforting MK and myself by talking about how new media trends are moving away from professionalization.
Hey Adil, good to see you.
شو هي عاد؟
See you.
Okay.
Hi,
Sorry,
how are you?
logging on.
أهلا وسهلا. Adil, we would love to hear more about media and reporting. And as you know, we have a project that you co-run called Media and Reporting that has been kind of dormant because of, the COVID situation. And are we likely to see this project sort of have a resurgence?
Definitely. There's a lot on the horizon. I think now that we're able to convene and meet and do things in more dynamic ways, the project will definitely be resuscitated. I'm gonna say that one of the two great things that we did with the project is not just putting content out there, but really bringing really compelling, creative minds together to think about the state and status of what's happening in the media. So we've had two incredible symposia. And I think the objective is to do something of that sort again so that we can revisit and kind of explore the future directions of where media is going. And so the project is a great place to do that.
Thank you. Adil, is there anything or any topic that I can throw out and you wouldn't be able to speak for 2 or 3 minutes extremely eloquently about?
Gundogan.
You were listening. I know.
dedicated
This is
viewer.
a very depressing day for me. 4-1 was it? Or was it 5-1?
4-1, but Salah scored an amazing goal. So we'll
He
take
did
that.
score an amazing goal. This is actually, if MK, if you can move a little bit to the left like this. Left. No, that's right. Left. Do you guys see Salah? Is he right there?
Ah,
Yeah.
the patron saint.
Exactly.
Mu'in, thank you for joining us. You had forgotten and you announced on the chat that you just remembered, but you were very fast. Thank you.
Pleasure to be here as always. MK,
Speedy.
We
see all of you.
Thank you, Habibi. We would now like to highlight a recent episode of the Connections podcast with you, hosted by Jadaliya co-editor, the one and only Mu'in Rabbani. In it, he spoke with our previous guest, Sinan Antoun. This is all incestuous, about the legacy of the Iraq War. Welcome back to the show, Habibi.
Thank you. Thank you. It was a fascinating interview with Sinan Antun, who
Oh,
is,
I saw that.
as most people probably know, a very distinguished novelist and poet, and also scholar, Iraqi American scholar. And I spoke with him on the 20th anniversary, or 20th commemoration of the invasion and occupation of Iraq. And I asked him about his experience of it at the time in 2003 when he was conducting research in Cairo. And he spoke about not only his own personal response to developments, but also what he saw happening at the time within Egypt, and the popular fury against what was seen as the complicity of the Egyptian government of Hosni Mubarak at the time with U.S. Policy. And we then spoke about what were the effects of lasting effects of the invasion and occupation. And I think he very much highlighted two issues: the institutionalized sectarianism and the institutionalized corruption, and made short shrift of these absurd claims that what the US actually did was introduce democracy to Iraq. And he specified that in some detail. And then a further section of the discussion focused on accountability and how we look at it now. I think we spoke only a day after the International Criminal Court had issued indictments against Russian officials, including President Putin, for their illegal actions in Ukraine. And of course, in with respect to the invasion and occupation of Iraq, there has been no accountability of any sort, either by the politicians directly responsible for taking the decisions for this war crime, or for those in the military who implemented it, or for that matter, those in the media who actively promoted this extraordinarily illegal and destructive war. I'm done.
Sorry, we were having a technical difficulty. Thank you. That gives us.
Yes, and well, the usual next question is always
What's next?
What's next? What's in store?
Well, I don't have anything confirmed at the moment, so
Oh my
I'll keep
God.
it a little vague, but have some feelers out. I have not yet done an episode on Syria, so
Oh.
that's in the works. Also, next month, May, is the 75th commemoration of the Nakba in Palestine. I'm also hoping to devote attention to that, in addition to several other ideas that will hopefully come to fruition in the coming weeks, and I'll keep you posted.
Can you tell us a little bit about what you might expect to see on the 75th anniversary of the Nakba? I mean, obviously there are ordinarily marches, protests, demonstrations, etc., but do you think there will be any exceptional actions being taken given it's the 75th anniversary?
And what we might be doing, because I saw the emails going around with you leading the charge.
Yes. Well, the two questions to take. The one concerning our own work first were the Palestine page and its editorial team is hoping to devote significant attention to this event, both in terms of recalling what actually happened, and just as importantly, its continued relevance today, because as many people point out, the Nakba was not just an event that commenced and ended 75 years ago, but is in many respects an ongoing process. Secondly, in terms of what might be expected, I think it's a very difficult question, because on the one hand, you have growing anger and among Palestinians, coupled with first steps towards greater organization and within the occupied territories, particularly in the West Bank. Well, at the same time, you have this unprecedentedly extremist Israeli government. You know, the finance minister, for example, openly characterizes himself as a fascist homophobe. You know, two statements about this issue are always correct. That every outgoing administration um, can be accurately characterized as the most pro-Israeli U.S. administration ever, and every new Israeli government can be characterized as the most right-wing Israeli government ever. And so I think, given the confluence of these factors, uh, one shouldn't expect the day to simply pass by uneventfully and quietly. And of course, I'm assuming that Palestinians in the diaspora will also be organizing a number of events.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Mohin.
sir.
Thank you very much, Mohin. We will always have you back. And we are really always talking off camera about the beautiful colors behind you.
Okay, thank you. It's always a pleasure.
Assalamu alaikum.
Bye.
Oh, you can stay because Adil's gonna say some things. Adil, can you, before we let you go, seriously, would you be able to tell us a little bit about the podcast that you have initiated titled Booked?
Booked and busy. No, just booked.
Yeah.
No, thank you for keeping me in, and I'm glad I get to hear about Ma'in's work, which is all
Were you really
remarkable.
listening? Were you really listening, Adil? We were like all over the place. You were
Were
worse
you?
than us.
Chasing the digital cat. No, I think so one of the things that we launched also, or didn't launch, but sort of have been working on, is a show dedicated to interviews with authors that discuss books that they release. It's sort of a play off of Newton, which is a very popular section in Jadaliya. But rather than focusing specifically on new books, these are books that may have been published at various points, but either have an important impact or delving into an area that is very, quite often not explored extensively. And so the first episode of Booked was launched with this issue of Status, and it is an interview with Ziad Fahmy, who's a professor of history at Cornell University, and I thought it was the most enjoyable interview I've ever had with anyone, really, because we talk about the early days of sort of audio innovation in Egypt, and the beginnings of like megaphones, a precursor to radio, and how all of a sudden, with the advent of electricity in the early part of the 20th century, people walking around the city start hearing recorded voices, right? And what that means for everything, like the sound of the adhan, the call to prayer, or the sound of like marketeers or merchants, and just audio sounds that are recorded and amplified, and how those soundscapes transform people's experiences of a city, but also transform a country and create a sort of a new found consciousness. So it's really a very, very enjoyable interview where he takes us on a journey of how he went from studying manuscripts and going through the archives to all of a sudden focusing and zooming in on audio and what sound looks like in its early days in Egypt. Of course, anybody who's been to Cairo or traveled to Egypt knows that it is very cacophonous, loud, boisterous, crazy in some ways, or drives one to be crazy. And all of a sudden, he's revisiting these moments where Cairo was actually quiet, and the beginning of the noise, the beginning of the sounds, the beginning of those sort of auditory experiences that we have with cities and places. So I think it's a landmark work for sound studies across the Middle East. I think it's really the first of its kind. So I would strongly encourage people to watch that interview. It's in video as well, so you can actually see some video clips, early video clips that we review of early animations in Egypt and things of that sort. And it's really a remarkable journey into the transformation of media in a country that later becomes a mass producer of content, both political, social, and cultural in the region. So that's what I would
Sounds
encourage.
fascinating.
Yeah, thank you, Mark.
I'll definitely be checking it out.
Isn't this so fun when we're all together?
And we,
It's fun when you hang around.
MK and I were thinking, mine is thinking, why am I still here? But you can go anytime you like. I tried to text you. I don't know if you saw it.
It was great to hear about this podcast, which I wasn't
No, absolutely.
familiar with, and I'll definitely be checking it out.
Absolutely, and I have to be honest. Both of you have been, to be honest, the three of us have actually produced a lot of podcasts, and I think that's a lot of males.
Yes.
That was just true.
I mean, it's not the guests, but yeah, I think there's like a bias here. I don't know if it's I don't know how it's happened. We'll have to look into it. Can you please?
Do we have some sectarian diversity?
Actually, yeah, we do have Christians and Muslims. That's good, and atheists.
Mashallah,
We're
we're good.
atheists.
Those names are
Alhamdulillah.
blurred.
Alhamdulillah.
But the gender isn't. We need to work on that. It doesn't work.
طيب. Thank you both so much. We are going to move to a section called Must Reads. And it's really interesting. If you guys want to continue to be plastered on the screen, we are very happy for that.
But I
Otherwise,
will say that Connections, in terms of guests, has achieved gender parity.
Excellent.
well, this sounds like something from the Iraqi ministry in 1984 or something. Actually, the Iraqi parliament and public sector was overwhelmingly, in some areas, mixed and had more of a. Actually, I was told by Maya Mikdashi we shouldn't say female anymore because it refers to animals. So every time I want to say female, something like yeah. Like there's as many or more women in the public sector in Iraq in the 1980s in labor and administration and administrative positions. In all cases, Mu'een and Adil, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, gentlemen.
I hope that we can
Thank
continue
you,
to
guys.
speak with you. شكرا كتير. Assalamu alaikum.
Take care. Bye, guys.
Assalamu alaikum.
As usual, we'll end with a couple must-read recommendations from our New Texts Out Now series.
Can you move that way a little bit?
This way?
No, the chair, because you're not towards me, away from me. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Oh, this is good.
Okay.
We should really do the whole show.
From the top. Okay. There is, in our Newton series, a conversation with Christiana Strava about her new book, Precarious Modernities, Assembling State, Space, and Society on the Urban Margins in Morocco, which is an ethnographic fieldwork about urban planning and socioeconomic inequality.
Newton is also featured, or is also featuring. This is falling apart. I'm glad we're repeating the
Yellow, go.
season 2. Okay.
No, still there's too many of me.
Newton is also featuring a book co-written by Abdulrahman Ayash, Amr Al-Afifi, and Nuha Izzat, called Broken Bonds, The Existential Crisis of Egypt's Muslim Brotherhood, 2013 to 2022. The book challenges dominant narratives about the Muslim Brotherhood in order to paint a complex picture of a group contending multiple crises. Make sure to check both of them out on Jadariya under the Newton section.
And that brings us to the end of our show covering the month of knowledge production in March. Please be sure to check out the episode digest on Jadariya later this week for links to all the content we covered today. Thank you to all of our guests and viewers, and a huge thank you to our in-studio guests for joining us today, Omar and Sinan. We will see you all next month for episode 3.8, where we will be covering the month of April.
Thank you all again, and we would like to thank our new and very quickly who very quickly mastered the producer role, Abdullah Tafish. Shukran, Abdullah, and we will see you soon. Assalamu alaikum.